and I'm the chair of this committee. I'd like to welcome you all to the Joint Development Control Committee meeting on Monday the 12th of February at 10 o'clock in the morning. Thank you. In fact, 7 minutes past 10. So, I'd like to members of the committee to introduce themselves, and I'm aware of one late. So firstly, Councillor Bagent, thank you for joining us online.
Yeah, I'm here.
Thank you. Councillor Porrer?
Present, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Smart?
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Smith?
Present, Chair.
Thank you. And Councillor Thornborough?
Present.
Thank you. And then also Councillor Khan?
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Fane?
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Hawkins, you're joining us online? Thank you. You're muted, but we can see you. Thank you.
Good morning, Present.
Thank you. And I have information that Councillor Stobart will try and join us online as soon as he can after 10 o'clock, so he'll join us a bit later. Are there any other members or any other apologies? Oh, Councillor Williams, sorry, thank you.
Yes, I'm here. I'm a substitute.
Substituting for?
I'm just here for the briefing, so I'm not...
Okay, right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Councillor Williams. John Williams. And Councillor Porrer?
Apologies from Councillor Levine, who's unwell.
Ah, Councillor Levine. Okay, righto. Thank you very much. So we have officers permanently at the table for our advice and assistance. So the delivery manager, Toby Williams. The strategic type... We giggled about this earlier on. Strategic Sites Team Leader, Emerging Growth Sites, Jonathan Brooks. We're going to have to find a short version of that. And Janine Richardson, our Principal Planner on Strategic Sites. Thank you very much. We've got up here at the table our Legal Advisor, Keith Barber. Thank you. And our Committee Manager today is James Goddard. And our producer today, thank you, Claire, is Claire Tunnicliffe. So, for all those watching online or indeed present here, copies of the agenda can be found on the City Council's website under Committee Meetings, Minutes and Agendas. You should have all received a copy of the developer's presentation. Please can those present in the Council chamber note that everything on your desk, including your laptop screen, may be broadcast at some point. The camera follows the microphone being switched on, so you're requested to wait a few minutes for that to pick up. Please raise your hand if you wish to speak, and I will endeavour to pick up your questions. For those participating in the meeting via the Teams app, the meeting chat is neither confidential nor private and can be subject to an FOI or GDPR request. So I would suggest that you don't use chat in this meeting unless it be for vital information. Please can meeting participants keep their microphone and cameras turned off and turn your phones to silent and until I ask you or invite you to speak. So, moving to agenda item 2, please could councillors advise if they have any declarations of interest on item 3 of the agenda, which is the core site at Hartree. I probably should declare I have an interest because I am in the neighbouring parish of Milton, but I come to this matter afresh. Thank you. So, please can the developers introduce themselves and their colleagues assisting with the presentation. You may wish to do that as you come to your parts. So you have 20 minutes to present your proposals. Once the presentation is finished, councillors have up to 25 minutes to ask questions, and I may extend that if we have a lot of interesting questions. So I'm going to start off with Mike Bodkin, developer for Town, who I think is going to, as he put it, MC the presentation. So thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
Councillors, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the invitation to speak to you this morning. Max, can we share screen, please? We've got a range of us with you in the room today, plus part of our extensive multidisciplinary team online to pick up detailed queries. As you might imagine, on a site as large and complicated as this, we've got a large team on the job and can bring in any of the technical questions that you may have to answer today or later on. Next slide, please, Max. I just want to cover the following issues today. As Chair said, I'm Mike Bodkin, I'm Head of Planning with Town. With Landsec UNI, we're the appointed master developers, and each of my colleagues will introduce themselves as we move through the presentation. We're going to cover vision for Hartree, the work to date, and then move on to look at the site and our emerging master plan. And I very much hope that, if invited, we want to come back a little later in the year to present the master plan as more detailed as we move through to our planning application timelines. And you'll hear a lot more about all of that as we go on. So moving swiftly on, can I bring in my colleague, Ben?
Ben Cartwright, thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm Ben Cartwright. I'm a Development Director from Landsec UNI. And as Mike said, we are the appointed master developer. We were appointed back in 2018 by Anglian Water and Cambridge City Council, our landowner partners, and we are working closely in partnership with town colleagues here today. And what does that mean? So under the master developer responsibilities, we are essentially in charge for the engagement, the design and the planning of the Hartree Master Plan, and ultimately the funding and delivery of the enabling infrastructure, which will allow our landowner partners to bring service plots to the market for disposal. If you could flick on, please, Max. So this is the site. Angela will talk a lot more around this later, but essentially just to contextualise ourselves, this is the Hartree Master Plan. It's 120 acres, owned broadly 80% by Anglian Water and 20% by Cambridge City Council, and we are sat at the heart of the North East Cambridge Area Action Plan area. So as I mentioned, we have been involved in the project since 2018, and part of the initial work that we've been undertaking was to look and develop a detailed vision for how we wanted this site to come forward. And part of the way that we did that was to develop a set of promises and values which were intended to be the cornerstone for the project and the master plan as it came forward. And ultimately, the intention is that the success of our project will be judged on whether we achieve the vision as set out within the promises and the values. So on screen, we have our 3 promises which we are making for the people, the city and the planet. So we are looking to bring forward a place that supports the health, happiness and well-being of those that live on site and use the site, to create a new quarter of Cambridge, and to create a place that is sustainable and fit for the challenges of the 21st century. Our 6 values will shape our approach to the design and the delivery of Hartree, and they are essentially the guiding principles for how we are looking for the site to come forward. And those are to create a new place that is rooted in Cambridge, to create a new place that will have been shaped by many through engagement, through design, all the way through to the delivery of this new quarter of Cambridge. It will be open to all, inclusive and integrated with nature, and we are hoping to promote active, low-car streets and, as I said, a sustainable place which will allow its residents to live within their means. And all of this culminated in a detailed design brief that we have given to the design team who are charged with bringing this site forward. Max, if you could flick on one side, please. The slide on screen is taken from a much more detailed, kind of north of 100-page design brief that we've created, but essentially it summarises the key elements that we're looking to bring forward: a sustainable, inclusive place of broadly 5,600 new homes, set within a culture of active travel, and around the concept of the 5-minute neighbourhood. And Angela will talk more to that a bit later on. I'll hand over to Colin Johnny.
Morning, everybody. My name is Johnny Amstead, founding director of Town, so a colleague of Mike's and James, and I've been working together with Ben on this project again since 2018 and met various of you in the past. Good to see people again. Thanks for this morning. I'm going to just give a quick flavour of some of the work that we've been doing over the last couple of years in particular. I'm not going to focus on the spatial design aspects. This is more about the process that we've been undertaking to bring forward this project so far. So the first of the 3 points that I wanted to talk about is about market research. We've commissioned quite a bit of detailed market research going back to data, demographics, but looking at the important question of who is going to live here, not just about their demographics, but actually who are they and what do they want from a place to live in, and how can we sort of enable them to live more healthily and in a more sustainable way, as Ben was describing. And it's been a great bit of work, really insightful and useful from our point of view, and quite different, I think, from what traditional real estate market research would usually provide. And I think we can share that if you haven't had sight of it before, for you to delve into. But there were 4 themes that came through that. The first was how we enable people to live at higher densities, which means living more in apartments than in houses, in a way that's going to satisfy people's needs, and frankly that they'll choose to live in when they could choose to live in a larger house somewhere out, from a further distance from the city. So how can we kind of achieve that? The second is new mobility solutions. How do we meet the challenge of reducing dependence on private cars? And the ramifications of that are substantial. We need to look at much more commitment to larger car clubs so that we can get people out of private cars and into shared vehicles, and that will have design implications that we're going to talk about later. The third is multifunctional open space. We know that we have a site that's the size that the site is, and there'll be 5,600 households or so living there. So we need to make every bit of space that we have as useful for people and for nature as we can make it, which means a lot of focus around multifunctionality and really paying attention to design detail to achieve that. And the last is about rental. We know that in the future here, just as with anywhere across the country, there's a focus on how people can rent in a way that is just as good from their point of view and just as economically sensible from their point of view as owning a place, which has been the traditional model in the UK, as you know. So how can we sort of create a place where that actually is part of the wider tenure mix? So that was a really useful piece of work. As I say, we can circulate more detail on that. The next area I wanted to talk about is around sustainability and quality of life. Ben talked about our vision and values. I won't get into this in detail, but this is just to show you the framework that we've used to think about it, which is based on donut economics, which you might be familiar with. It's a sort of a way of thinking about sustainability and quality of life within a single framework. The basic premise is that the outside of the ring is about planetary limits and the resources that we have available to us as a society, which we know are finite. And the inner ring of the donut is around making sure that we meet people's needs, and that's called the social foundation. And that talks to the 2 of the promises that Ben described in our vision, which are around people and their quality of life at the same time as respecting planetary limits. So that's the way that we have approached that, and it is the sort of top level that cascades into a lot of more detailed thinking. And then finally from me, we have done, as you will no doubt be aware, a lot of community and stakeholder engagement over the last several years, including a festival, an ideas exchange, which is a group of residents who've met almost monthly over the last 2 or 3 years. We've worked with small committees of special interest groups, people with specific needs. We've done schools work and other work with young people. And we've made a lot of appearances at a lot of events in the local area on a cargo bike with a mini presentation and exhibition that we've been taking everywhere. My colleague Francis and James in particular, you probably will have seen them at various events. It's been really interesting. We've learned a lot. We've digested that information, and more importantly, that's been fed into the work and into the team's understanding of what's required locally. I'm going to pass to Mike just to give a quick insight into the planning conversation so far.
Thank you, Max. Next slide, please. So over the last year, we're already a year into a PPA process, and we've got the best part of this year still to come. We've been talking through a number of key issues related to the master plan and looking at the area action plan and what divergences there might be from the area action plan to the master plan, and trying to understand our reasoning behind that, and the officers at the Shared Planning Service, from their perspective, telling us why things have been brought about a particular way. That's been a really interesting process of engagement. So, as you can see from this slide, which conscious you've already had anyway, so there have been some really key site issues that we've been looking at in relation to some of the building blocks around the master planning, such as where the district centre is located, how to encourage movements through and across the site in relation to cycling, and a whole range of different factors leading us to the presentation that we're making today, and that Angela, I think we need to pass over to you now, because I'm conscious that we're halfway through more than. Thank you. Max, move on. Oh, sorry. Let's just take the programme. Sorry, that was my fault. Just to say that we're aiming to submit a planning application around about November of this year. One of the key determining factors in that is the DCO decision, and happy to pick up any questions on that. Complex series of detailed discussions between ourselves and officers, the planning services and colleagues, leading to a master plan mix a little later on in the spring, another presentation hopefully back to you, and planning submission later this year. Anyway, with that, Angela.
Thanks, Mike. Okay, so we're going back to the site now, and we'll start to have a walk through the rest of the evolving master plan. So the site, as Ben said, is in the NEC area, and we're up in the top corner of the NEC boundary, up against the A14, and then the rail line up against the eastern edge of the site, which overlooks the fens and the river. Of course, today there's a lot of infrastructure that's existing on site from the Anglican wastewater treatment plant, and of course there's a golf driving range towards the south of the site that faces onto Cowley Road south. If we can go to the next slide, Max. So there's a number of challenges on the site that we can see and can't see. Some of those challenges are because of the existing use of the site today, and has been for a long time. It's a very inward-looking site because of the use of what it has today and for a long time. And one of the key objectives of the master plan is how we open up the edges of the site and knit it into the proposed developments that are coming forward in the NEC area, but also to the wider communities that exist and will be coming forward in the area. Some other things to point out on this map are, in particular, the edges along the A14 and along the first drain, that we're investigating different amounts and quality of those offsets of what exists along those edges, and how we face buildings and program along those edges. You also see a big orange line going through the site, which today is high voltage cabling going over the site, and we're looking to underground those going through the site, so they'll disappear. But we will have a number of underground infrastructure and infrastructure above ground as well. Next slide, Max. So there's many opportunities that we've got on this site, in particular because of the things that are left behind. I'll start with the legacy infrastructure, which is those concrete structures and piping tanks that are left behind from the wastewater treatment plant today. And we're doing a lot of investigations into how we can reuse elements of that cycle into future water catchment networks, or material reusage, or life cycle analysis, how that ties into our carbon approach. Of course, we've got communities that exist there today around the site, but are maybe not so connected to the site because of its existing use today. So how can we improve the connections to open up thoroughfares and walking paths, and particularly cycle paths, in particular to the communities to the north of the A14. And we've got a number of landscape assets on site, including A-grade trees, B-grade trees, but also a lot of site planting that's been not managed, I guess, or managed appropriate to the current use. It's a wastewater treatment plant, but there's many opportunities that we can use to help structure the master plan that we're looking to evolve. Next slide, Max. This slide points out a few of the key elements that we're aiming to, that really anchor our master plan and the structure of the master plan. There's of course the first drain, which is an existing part of a wider water network. There's the forest planting along the A14, which is quite a thick buffered edge that we're looking into together with our arborist on how we can reuse and reprogram that site. We've got existing tanks on site, and in particular, these tanks we're doing a lot deeper investigations into in terms of water attenuation, and of course there's existing structures on the site. This is just an example tower structure which we're hoping to reuse as another element in terms of programming. Yes, we'll go to the next slide, Max. So the master plan vision is to create a place where it is possible to live locally. That's a real key part of the 5-minute approach, which we're really hoping to, well, using it as a driving force for the design approach. Next slide, Max. So Johnny mentioned that there will be a higher, there's a lot of people that are going to be living on the site. We've got 5,600 homes, and the types of homes that we're going to be making or designing in are a higher density in terms of apartment living. There's a real opportunity here between proximity of uses and how we design the urban form in order for that density to feel like it's a really good place to be. There's an element of affordability in living in a 5-minute city where you can walk to work and drop your kids off at school or pick up a bottle of milk down the bottom of the street. But there's also the other side of that, which is quality of life that comes with being able to access what you need in your everyday life without having to jump into a car. Next slide, Max. So I'll just pop through we've got 4 emerging concepts. The 3 neighbourhoods, which is anchored in the AAP policy framework, but we're looking at 3 neighbourhoods that have at their core shops, a school, mobility opportunities. Next slide. Key places in the master plan, which is anchored around entry points along the Cowley roads, the squares. We've got really key elements of the landscape infrastructure. And we'll go on to the next slide, which describes the play line, which is a very strong landscape element feeding through the centre of the site. This addresses both the existing constraints that we've got on the site today in terms of underground pipelining, but as well as providing really heavily programmed and useful amenity in the centre of the site for those living there, but also those surrounding communities. Next slide, Max. And then, of course, we've got the Living Green Network, which is our concept that we're using to help describe carless streets and a very integrated bike network that connects both the new neighbourhoods as well as into the existing communities that are there today. Next slide, Max. So here we are at the moment with our evolving master plan, around 5,600 homes and 20 hectares of open space. Centred around a number of courtyard models as well as point blocks and terraced housing mixed in amongst the 3 neighbourhoods. So there's a real mix amongst across the whole master plan in terms of housing types. Next slide, Max. And then key investigations going forward, we're of course looking into water use and attenuation. It's a huge driver of our landscape strategy and really heavily knitted into the open space quantum. It's location and how we plan for it. This is also connected to obviously active travel, how we're looking at density, and then backed up by our investigations into noise and air quality. Next slide, Max. So I think at this point I'll just hand over to Mike to sum up.
Thank you. Can we go to the summary, please, Max? So just to conclude from us this morning, this is a vision-led project, and we're not just saying that. It's truly the promises and values as well have driven everything behind it through the master plan. The emerging master plan has evolved in response to engagement with the shared planning service, stakeholders and the public. We're proposing 5,600 homes, 90,000 square metres of commercial space, another 20,000 square metres of community uses, including schools, 2 schools. We've got further engagement ongoing with rounds in March and September, and March and the summer, pardon me, and we envisage submitting our hybrid planning application in November of this year. And that concludes the presentation this morning, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for sticking to time. That's good of you, and I'm sure you'll have an opportunity to go back to your slides when people ask questions. Can I just remind members now that we are encouraged, you're encouraged to ask questions, we're all encouraged to ask questions, but to be careful not to express any particular views which might prejudice your view when this finally comes to JDCC for determination. So asking questions is fine. Did you want to make a point there, Toby?
That's absolutely fine, Chair. It's healthy for members to raise concerns, but not to approach it with a closed mind, that's all.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to kick off with the first question, and that is that right at the end of your summary, you indicated that the increase, obviously 5,600 dwellings was what was required through the HIF funding, but that you're proposing 90,000 square metres of commercial and industrial space, commercial and R&D. But the original proposal in the area action plan was 23,000. So this is nearly 4 times as much commercial space. So could you just explain how you're justifying that increase, please?
Yes, of course, thank you. I'd like to bring Ben in to address this point, thanks.
Thanks, Mike.
Just before you start, could I just ask Fiona Bryant to turn her camera off, unless you wish to say something, Fiona? Otherwise, we're getting a wonderful picture of you.
Sorry, Councillor Bradman, I'll turn my camera off.
Thank you very much. And do go back to your slides, obviously, if that's helpful.
Thank you, Chair. I think there are a number of ways to answer that question. The intention of the master plan at Hartree is very much to be a mixed-use place rather than a residential neighbourhood. And I think there is the quantum of commercial that we are proposing allows for that and really gives that mixed-use feel. So I think that's the first point I'd like to make. Secondly, we mentioned one of our values is around street life, and we are required to support a district centre within the Hartree master plan, and the ability to deliver commercial accommodation and life kind of throughout the 9 to 5 part of the day will really support the vitality and the viability of those active ground floor uses. And again, that goes to a kind of a critical mass to be able to support what we're proposing to come forward on the ground floor. And I think the final point I'd like to make is that you can't look past some commercial drivers as well, in terms of there is a level of supply-demand imbalance in the market, and we would like to try and capture some of that in the early phases.
One of the other questions I wanted to ask you is, what is the evidence that you have that there is a big need for R&D space?
So we've been doing a lot of work at the moment with our advisors and our design team to consider that 90,000 square metres of commercial. We have various supply-demand imbalance graphs and pieces of research that we would be happy to share with you, Chair, that supports that. And we can do that following the meeting or set up another briefing.
I think we'd appreciate that. Right, I can see I have a question online, Councillor Stobart, and I'm going to come to you first because you're out of the room, and then I'll come over to Councillor Power and Councillor Smart. Thank you.
Chair, thank you very much. I hope you can hear me okay. I arrived a little late, forgive me, and to the developer team, but I just wanted to ask a question primarily about future-proofing of the concept. So perhaps initially we might think of future-proofing around climate robustness, and we can think about hot and wet, and sensible drainage schemes that can deal with increased rainfall. It would be nice to think of increased rainfall in a sense, but it could become problematic. and also cold. So we might, in the timescale of the development and its life, be having seriously cold winters. So I just wanted to then tack on just a question about transport scenarios. So what's the story? If somebody, say, located up in the northwest corner of the site, taking the train from Cambridge North, what are the sensible routes to get to Cambridge North to take a train? And then looking perhaps further ahead or in a slightly different dimension, if light rail arrives in this part of Cambridge, it would come from the west. What would be the way of accommodating light rail if indeed one day it arrived on the doorstep of Hartree? So two things: future-proofing for environment and also transport scenarios and stories. So I'll leave it there on those 2 points.
Thank you, Councillor Stobart. So, who would like to?
Thank you. There's some few challenging questions there, Councillor. On the future proofing, I mean it is something, and we've got a member of our technical team who advises us on sustainability online, and I can bring her in a moment, I think, if we need to. But the issue for us in designing a master plan is that we need to ensure that it is flexible, and the balance between flexibility and certainty. We have got a great team on. We're designing in accordance with the requirements to meet climate change in relation to drainage and the whole range of factors. So there is a whole range of testing that we have to do for the master plan in relation to daylight, sunlight, wind, etc. So, and I think an emerging picture that we're trying to work with our colleagues in the planning services is in relation to regular reviews. So we might well use the Section 106 to take gateway reviews and see how we're doing. So, for example, our transport trip budget will be measured and monitored, and if we fail to meet the targets, then there will be agreed remedies. So that is one way that we'll use the planning system to address that whole range of challenging factors and the fact that we've got such a long build-out rate. Dave Watson, would you like to say a few words on transport, light rail, connectivity?
So the suggestion was that there might be connection from the west for light rail. How would that be accommodated?
Can you introduce yourself, Dave?
Hi there, thanks, Mike. Dave Watson from Pearl Fisherman, so transport consultant. So yeah, I think it's a good question, isn't it? Because the landscape of transport's always changing, and I think when I first started on this project, the Cam Metro was still kicking around. So I think we've always had to maintain some level of flexibility with the master plan. I think, as you rightly identify, the connection down from the north east corner has always been quite challenging to get down to the station. So I think we've prepared quite strong links along the first drain to get us down, but we've also got flexibility in the master plan. So if the Brookgate development comes forward, if there are changes to the Cowley Industrial Estate, we can then link in via there. We're also implementing streets that can also accommodate sort of micro-mobility as well, so to enhance the connection, so we're not just reliant on walking and cycling, and also looking into whether the potentials for sort of shuttle buses and things like that. So I suppose it's probably a similar answer to the light rail in terms of we're keeping the connections as flexible as possible, and constantly just revising them and looking at them, and also a lot of it's about talking to the other stakeholders, the other landowners. So we've got the task and finish group, so we're constantly liaising with people like Brookgate to see whether those connections can be enhanced.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to move on to our next question. So I've got Katie Porrer, then Martin Smart, then so Katie Porrer, do you want to go first?
Thank you very much. Some of these are comments rather than questions. It's good to hear about reuse, so attenuation tanks. I'm mindful as part of the DCO there will be, I think they're described as treatment centres left on site with chimneys. So I think obviously we need to be mindful of any exclusion zones around those. It'd be useful to know where they might be. When you see at King's Cross, they've made amazing use of the gas. I mean, obviously the concrete structures you showed potentially less stunning architecturally. So I'll be interested to know how you think about using those, whether it's more a matter of recycling the concrete. I think the thing I learned from the tour we did in London was you have to lead on green infrastructure and on inclusive design. Some of the places we visited, I mean, I think one was clearly never been visited by probably a woman with children, the one with the canal with no fence next to it and nothing at night. I understand what you're saying about ground floor usage, but after 5 p.m. when shops shut, that goes dark. So I really think we need to be thinking about that. And that idea that you need to see the green first, it shouldn't be an afterthought. You know, again, some of the places we visited in London, even the play streets there were very much a street with some play equipment in the corners. It didn't feel like a coherent whole. So I hope we can lead on that. And again, the play line down the middle, that's a really interesting idea. The pictures you show, again, do make it look quite like a road with some extra bits. Again, I think for me, I would place some value on that being the other way round, that, you know, the play and the green comes first. And I think we saw some good examples in Hackney where they had planted trees very, very early on, so that almost the first thing on site, so that they were able to mature well before the buildings came up. I'd note that a concern often raised in this committee is adopted roads, or rather not adopted, particularly if you're looking for long-term rental. Then we have issues with management companies, you know, the charges and things like that. So the more roads to adoptable standards that the county would take, in my opinion, is generally viewed as a positive. And again, I'm interested about this idea of making rental a choice, a bit like it is in a lot of European cities. There isn't a culture of buying. When I lived in France, it was the same. Again, I'm assuming we would be looking at long contracts, you know, where the tenant can leave, but the landlord can't turf them out. So I'd be very interested about that. And finally, definitely car club. That's a big thing that I always mention. But I do think we have to be realistic about things like delivery vehicles. Are we looking at a hub, for example? That idea that otherwise everyone will be phoning up Tesco's and then we'll have 15 vans drawing up and down those streets that are meant to be play streets. So most of those are comments, I think, rather than things that require an answer, but I just thought that would be useful. Those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you. Did you want to respond to any of those points?
Yeah, if you don't mind, Chair, I'll just say a few things. Firstly, the Anglian Water legacy infrastructure, in actual fact, in relation to their ongoing infrastructure, there's not much more than venting pipes, which have been built into the design of the master plan already, and they're very rarely likely to be used and won't be an issue in ODA terms. The reuse of the tanks is something that we're investigating at the moment. You saw the photos of them. It is possible that we may use them as part of our drainage for retention on site, which could be a good use actually for lots of reasons, notwithstanding the reuse of that carbon. I'll just turn to James to talk a little bit about the work that we've been doing with some of the stakeholders.
Thanks, Mike. Just picking up on the point on play and safety and play within the landscape. As Mike said, we've done a lot of work with different stakeholders. A few of those stakeholders include Make Space for Girls, who are the national charity for kind of provision of spaces for young girls in the public realm, and that's influenced some of the work that we've done in the master plan. We're also bringing forward a children and young person strategy as part of our outline planning application, which is kind of beyond the validation requirements, and that work is being informed by that work with Make Space for Girls, Cambridge Curiosity and Imagination, and Tim Gill, who's a leading expert in the design of spaces for young people. So that's all been part of the evidence base that we've kind of been bringing forward and informed the design of the play line as well.
Just before we go on to the next questioner, can I just clarify, does the Making Space for Girls mitigate against large green spaces, or because they tend to be where people play football and frisbee and things, or what are the spaces that are suitable for girls then?
Yes, that's a good question. They do mitigate to that to an extent. They like to bring forward kind of smaller, more intimate spaces, and they've done a lot of work on looking at kind of how the use of those larger spaces work, and if you are going to have larger spaces, how you can offset that with smaller spaces as well. And that's something which has informed the kind of the variety of public spaces in the master plan, where you've got everything from kind of larger, more open spaces, similar to more central Cambridge spaces, through to smaller, kind of more intimate spaces and some walking trails.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Smart, and then I'm coming to Councillor Thornborough.
Thanks, Chair. Okay, 3 questions and a few comments. So questions are we paying you? So we're the planning authority or also councils, Cambridge City Council has an interest. Secondly, substantive question for Johnny, I think. So is there build to rent? Can you talk about that? And service charges. And thirdly, in conversations in the past, I think pre-COVID, I spoke about live work and especially artist makers using this site. That was not taken up, as far as I understand, at least the artist makers wasn't. Post-COVID, maybe there might be more interest in expanding that sort of live work on-site part. And, you know, if that is the case, how are you going to facilitate that, you know, in terms of space in the home, space, you know, facilities in the community, etc. No one wants to sit in their bedroom all day and work. You know, there needs to be other stuff too. And the other comments are, so the presentation wasn't very good. You did all the wrong things. You read words from the screen. The pictures on the screen were not legible. That's ever so partly our fault because the facilities in here are not fit for purpose because we can't see the screens from where we sit properly, but they look like images from an A3 booklet. So you could use a laser pointer as well. So when I did architecture at university, the idea was that, you know, you talked to the subject and showed images to support that, but you've just done, you know, you've just read things on the screen, which is not useful. So it sort of puts a bad tone on the information you're delivering. The other thing is, I presume this is a public domain presentation and that it's being recorded so residents can hear all this. And I think that was all of my points.
Thank you,
Yeah, that's it.
Smart.
Thank you.
Thank you. Did you want to respond on the elements of, rather surprising question, are we paying you? Because it's a city council, and then build to rent and the service charges and the workspace.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Sorry to disappoint you, Councillor. I'll bring in Ben first.
Sorry, Councillor, I missed the first question. Was it, are we being paid for our services as master developer?
So who's your paymaster?
Yes, okay. So we have what's called an MDA, a Master Development Agreement, with the joint venture of the landowners, so Cambridge City Council and Anglian Water. We benefit from a share of the land receipts that are received once allowances have been made for enabling and infrastructure costs. We also benefit from a development management fee for implementing that infrastructure.
Shall I pick up the build to rent?
One moment. I wondered if Keith or Toby wanted to come back in on that point about who's paying who, or are you happy with it?
I mean, it's interesting, Chair, but I don't think it's entirely relevant in terms of the planning considerations for this committee.
I think it was more because Councillor Smart was partly wondering whether they needed to declare an interest. But anyway, okay, let's move on then. So build to rent and the service charge.
Thank you for that. Yeah, and I was going to pick up the point that Councillor Porrow had made in the previous one about the related point around build to rent. I'll do that one first, but it was just interesting to hear the observation around European tenures, and I think that's very, very relevant. But as you were getting at, it means, and this is, I guess, connected to the service charges thing, to make it a sort of tenure of choice, it needs to actually be something that you can compare to the traditional way of purchasing homes in the UK, and it actually makes sense when you look at everybody's, somebody's whole circumstances all considered, including the security of tenure, the length of contract, the price of the contract, the price of the service charge, and the their ability to save alongside, so that the saving isn't all in the asset of their home. So we need to do some more work on that. I think that what we're trying to be doing this year is to have a set of very firm commitments to say, if that our operators, our partners who will be eventually owning the assets and renting them, will need to demonstrate that they can hit those various points, so that it won't just be a sort of fully unregulated rental market. Bearing in mind that we know that the Cambridge economy is very hot, that there is demand. So our job will be to set a sort of a framework which actually takes into account the mathematics of the service charge, that shows that it's affordable for the kind of people that we're talking about who are going to end up living here, and that it offers the sensible levels of protection, and that ultimately, if you have free choice, if you're a consumer and you have choice between buying or renting, that you actually may wish to choose to rent because of the merits rather than because you have to, because you're priced out of the purchase market. So coming to the service charge point, I think it's a question that we have through the whole scheme, not just through the rent, because when you look at the estate management that's going to be implicit in what we showed, you saw it's a master plan with a lot of green space, a lot of public space. There's the question of adoption and the degree to which roads are adopted, or which, and that's a partially advanced conversation, I think, around which of our streets and other assets are going to be adopted. Our job is going to be to make sure that where they're not adopted, we have put in place financial mechanisms that allow us to stand before you when the planning application goes in and say, look, we've made allowance. These streets and spaces will be well managed, in perpetuity. And, of course, you'll wish to see that that's the case. That will have a cost. It will have a service charge cost. The service charge will be felt by people who are going to be owning or living, and we know that it's a sensitive topic because because it's a cost that people end up getting saddled with over a period of time potentially. That we know there are risks associated with that. Over the course of this year, we'll be doing the detailed calculations in respect of rental and ownership properties to make sure that we can be very, very clear about the level of service charge and make sure that it's financially sustainable for people who are going to be living here. And bearing in mind that we've made a commitment that this will be a place that's open to all, a high proportion of affordable housing, or policy compliant level of affordable housing, that we need to be very serious and credible about the level of service charge that we're committing people to.
Thank you. And could you talk about the live workspace?
Yeah, I can jump in on that. Angela here from Shalana Kobe, we're the master plan lead and architects. Across the scheme, we're investigating a number of different typologies, from family-sized apartments to intergenerational apartments, to the possibility of blocks being modelled loosely. I guess it's co-housing here in the UK, but similar to situations that we have in Sweden that are very common in terms of having shared facilities within the block that could be used from different households. So the aim of, providing those sorts of extra spaces, that they have an inbuilt flexibility to them. So over some parts of the year, or for some years, they could be a co-working space. They could maybe potentially be a space that could be leased out. They could also be either connected and inbuilt into the people who are managing the property itself. It depends on how those typologies are designed and broken up. And that's the process that we're in at the moment, how you actually break up the blocks, how you might articulate those blocks, and how you might provide for a number of different living situations and people at different stages of their life.
So, for example, are you suggesting that maybe part of a ground floor of what would otherwise be a residential block might be a sort of touchdown hot desk space?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Or it might be a community space, or it could be a number of different things. And that's all part of making sure that the ground floor is active in terms of both safety into the landscape and... Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Right, so next... sorry, Martin, Councillor Smart, did you want to come back briefly?
Back, Chair, briefly. Thank you very much. Thank you for the answers. So, I mean, I don't have a lot more to add, but just to add a bit, put a point on things, I suppose. In terms of service charges, I was speaking to residents yesterday who live on King Street, Peabody, housing, and one particular resident is a single mother, a young single mother, limited income. Their service charges, I believe, are 50% of their rent, which seems high to me, although I'm not familiar with the market totally. I know total figures like 8,000 a year often gets banded around for some big developments. So I just want to highlight that for some people, service charges can be a complete rip-off, and I don't want that to happen. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Smart. And Fiona Bryant would like to assist us in this. Thank you, Fiona.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Bradnam. Actually, it was just a quick point on Councillor Smart's question on living and working. I think it's very important, as Angela says, that the focus is on sufficient space to live and work in the home. But the part of the research we've done has also been with a lot of different people about how they live. And if we're looking to make this very much a living streets, gathering streets, safe streets type of place, active streets, it's about the sorts of things where people store. So prams, where people who need to drive more often might store them normally in a car. It's about also finding space for those. So it's really looking in detail how people live, not just about their workspace, but how they need to live and how they would live with a more active travel space as well.
Thank you very much. And indeed, thinking about it, I remember flats in Germany having a big store in this basement where you could put your bike, your pushchair, all sorts of other things. Moving on then, Councillor Thornborough, and then I'll come to Councillor Fain, then Councillor Khan, then Councillor Smart. Okay, so Councillor Thornborough.
Can I just say, I think we're meant to be finishing in a minute. So can I go? I have 5 points and questions. Can I leave them?
I have discretion to go on longer if.
Well, these are big strategic questions,
okay, so
and
do go ahead.
I don't mind getting the answers back later.
Okay.
But the first one's about. I'd like to know what consultations have been carried out with the County Council and Network Rail about access to the land north of the Fen Road crossing, because it's been made absolutely clear by Network Rail that the aim is to close the Fen Road crossing, and therefore access to those businesses and homes has to be from the north. And my understanding is that the county and Network Rail have absolutely agreed to deal with this, but a road has to go north and has to, be accessible. So
Thornborough, just to be clear, that's outside the red line?
I know, but it may impact on this development depending on what the solution is. So again, I just think that that's important. The other thing is you've referred to this as a master plan, but this site is one of the biggest sites within the wider AAP area. But the AAP requires a percentage of open space over the whole site. And we need to be absolutely confident that this large site will provide the open space required, but in the wider context, but also the play facilities requirement in the wider context, and the ability to move around in the wider context. And I'd like to know how that fits in. But the other, and also for things like you mentioned about, there's a huge increase in work space for businesses, and again, how does that fit into the wider context? Because from the first consultation after the first consultation for the AAP, the area of business was reduced, but not housing, because of the real concern that housing crisis is what is kind of stifling Cambridge, and the amount of homes, new homes versus space for new businesses had to be considered. Then I think the discussions about rental and ownership is important. I'm really hoping that we can move away from leasehold and move to common hold, and also the Cambridge Building Society are now providing new homes where 70% of your rent can be used as a deposit for the property later. The great ideas coming out. Finally, I think your consultation process, I think, it sounds like it could be exemplary and we could all learn from that. I really like the reference to donut economics, and it'd be really great if the final proposal could use the donut economics analysis, and I'd really like to see how that fitted in. But these are big questions and I'm not expecting an answer now.
Thank you. However, if you have a brief response to any particular one of them, we'd welcome to hear something.
I would just like to clarify on open space. We will be meeting our requirements for open space on site within our red line, and we are in dialogue with the planning service about how open space across the whole North East Cambridge area fits in. We have had discussions. We are aware of the Fen Road crossing. It is very much something that has been dealt with in other environments, so it's not impacting on us, and it's certainly not in any proposition that any traffic would come through our site.
Thank you. I would observe that some of the green space in your red line is so close to the A14 that it will be both noisy and I just wanted you to consider about how will you mitigate the effect of noise on some of the green space. But that can come later on. Councillor Fane.
Thank you, Chair. One of the emerging demands on developers during the period you've been talking about has been, of course, the requirements on beauty and the emergence of the Office of Place. A key factor that I have noticed, including on our trips to the King's Cross area and Coal Rock Yard and so on, has been the importance of roofscapes. And sometimes that is apparent in the existing structures, which of course will be largely absent on this site, as contrast to the modern structures. I just wondered whether in your engagement with the Office of Space, you have seen ways of meeting their demands, bearing in mind that beauty can be inevitably rather subjective as against tree-lined streets, which is fairly clear.
Yeah, I completely concur with your last remark about beauty being subjective, and I think the planning system is grappling with that currently. We certainly have proposals for roofscapes, and I think they will be exciting, potentially using open for play space on roofs, the roof of our mobility hubs. That could be one area, using reflecting climate change, but also doing things differently in comparison to how things have been done traditionally. So play space, potentially blue and green roofs, and of course solar panels, so a whole range of stuff. Can I just make a comment about the Chair's comment, which has completely gone, sorry.
Commented about how would
the
you
A14
anticipate
noise,
mitigating the
okay.
noise in the A14?
Yes, sorry, I did. It's very, very real and live issue for us currently as we're doing further work on it. We've had discussions with National Highways. Of course, there is already a very successful open public park just the other side of the A14, and we're looking at how noise levels would be different if they would on both sides. But when we bring the application in, there will be some closely detailed work that looks at what the implications are for using that space, and also drawing the best practice across the country in terms of noise and recreation and the public realm.
Thank you. Right, Councillor Khan and then Councillor Smart.
When Milton Keynes was designed, the whole area included, I think,
Sorry.
it included about 10% of land which was left flexible and unallocated, which respects the fact that it's very difficult to predict the future. I mean, one of the major influences that you talked about was increasing the amount of employment space was the fact that at the moment there's a boom on requirements for lab space and this sort of equipment. Now, this may continue, it may not. It's always on the assumption this is going to be the big boom town of Britain. Now, that may occur. We don't know whether it may be that Brexit proves more of a constraint than we imagine. It may be that other factors come in, which we don't know. So I was wondering how much flexibility within your design have you included to cater for changes which may occur or may not occur. I think it's very important to design. I've seen problems in this area where we have designed on the basis of assumptions which then have not proved to be the case in the future. That's part of the problem of planning. We always have that. But I just wondered what you've included.
Thank you.
And the other aspect of this was an assumption which I think may be questionable, is the fact that there's going to be a much greater demand for rental, and that there isn't going to be the same sort of demand for purchase on this. I was very impressed a couple of years ago when a young professional, which is what is booming in Cambridge, the sort of people in 20s and 30s, were saying that they'd now been in the area for 2 or 3 years and now were wanting to settle on a longer basis, and they couldn't find more flat accommodation, 1 or 2 bedroom accommodation to buy. It was just impossible. No, it was all either very, very posh for people who earned a lot of money and had got capital, or affordable housing for rent. And there wasn't much in between. So I think that assumption, I would question that assumption, and I would want to know what provision you're making for this particular market, which seems to be underserved in this area.
Thank you. Would you like to respond?
I think that first and foremost on your latter question, that there will be a range of tenures on offer, and we will hope, linking it to the first one, is that over time we need to be flexible and be able to respond as the market changes. On master planning, unlike Milton Keynes, which had land, we clearly don't have the land. So we have to be more prescriptive in our master planning and respond to the market and the world as we know it today, albeit we know there are some existential crises that we are challenged with as a planet. And in that respect, so we will deal with it conventionally through the planning process and outline planning application, parameter plans, and ability to respond over time to those. But I just wonder if, Angela, you wanted to say a little bit about the flexibility in master planning and how we can respond to that.
Yes, thanks, Mike. So there's a number of different things that we're building into the master plan in terms of looking into essentially the adopted streets as one of the ways. So they set up a fixed point in the master plan, and then there are elements that can move around within that. We're designing to a number of different scenarios and testing a number of different scenarios with different plot typologies, which could either be changed in or changed out. Looking at the flexibility within the block. The block scale is really important to us in terms of understanding, it connects into facing onto the street in a sense of address, but also, of course, links into bins and bikes and storage and that sort of flex in terms of providing those services. The other flex is, of course, within the floor plans themselves, and if there's opportunity to have more smaller apartments or less bigger apartments. And so we've been testing, the housing or the apartment mix has changed as the brief has evolved while we've been working on the projects. There's a number of different examples that we've been looking to in terms of providing different scenarios there. And then, of course, back to Mike's point about parameter plans and the design code, we'll be looking to make sure that they are shaped in a way that it locks in the really crucial things, of course, in the master plan and allows enough flex for there to be changes in the future, hopefully.
Just Johnny, come in with one final point, please.
Yeah, I really recognise the point about resilience and designing for things that we don't actually know what the future is going to hold. I just wanted to say 1 or 2 things on that. One is that we've got some experience of that through Marmalade Lane, where we were the developer, and we delivered a place there with some with some uncertainties around how certain spaces were going to be used that weren't actually locked fully down in the design or planning application. So, for example, there was a large storage space that was going to be originally for storage of some canoes that one of the residents owned at that time. That hasn't been used for that purpose because that person never in the end moved in. But the space has now been used as a community shop, which started through COVID and is now still going. It's a community shop that serves the 42 households. If we can get that same kind of level of, sort of healthy level of uncertainty, so that you are absolutely creating some spaces that could be used for a number of different things, coupled with management approaches that give people real control over their spaces, I think that's really critical. So it's not just leaving spaces with no purpose, which is the risk, I suppose. But if we can kind of couple opportunities for spaces to be used in different ways with kind of creating a sort of sense of community empowerment and ownership and management that allows people to make use of those spaces in a way that actually helps people to meet their own needs over time as those circumstances change, then I think that's kind of the sweet spot where we want to be.
Thank you. Right. And lastly, Councillor Smith, sorry.
Thank you very much, Chair. I just want to make a couple of comments on detail and then about issues I think it would be very helpful if you brought back to your next presentation. So the first one was on the location of the mobility hubs. I saw that there was one destined for the northeast of the site, which would mean that traffic would need to travel right across the site. I think that's totally unnecessary. There were successful schemes, Marmalade Lane, Eddington. You don't have the traffic in the residential areas. So to design the mobility hubs so that it minimise the amount of driving on site will make a major contribution to making the site much more livable. I want to have my two pennyworth on estate management as well. It's essentially it's democratic. You have a situation where the tenants or the leaseholders are paying service charge to a freeholder who is then the client of the estate manager, and the freeholder has not really got no skin in the game at all, and the people who are actually paying for the service don't have a voice. So that's wrong. That needs to be turned around. So I just want to pick up on an issue that the chair raised, which is about the relationship of the development closest to the A14. It's very problematic, and I notice it was one of the issues that you're going to be looking at in detail. And it's all about the tension between air and noise pollution and natural ventilation and double aspect and so on, and also the width of the green ribbon that you've got there along there. We're not sure whether that's because of the embankment and even like the geography of it, but that really needs a really detailed attention to see how that very problematic part of the site can be dealt with successfully. The other point I wanted to make was about the expansion of the commercial space is a significant departure. And in a way, it's the only way in which you can intensify the site for increasing land values, because the 5,600 is really sort of in aspect, isn't it, really? So you can't increase or decrease that too much. But what I'm concerned about are the consequences of that intensification and whether it's actually leading to increased densification of the residential areas, pressure on the heights of the development, and I'm observing that, I think, in the play line, which looks to be quite a downgrade from what we've seen before. And I think from the visit to London, I came away convinced we need to have the primary schools located along that play line so that they have direct access, as you were saying, to the multi-use of the limited available of usable green space that we have on the site. I do agree with the idea that commercial neighbourhood, because it's going to be one of the three neighbourhoods, isn't it? So we've got three neighbourhoods, two residential and one commercial. I think that will be a dead zone during the evenings and at weekends and holidays. And I think that's also problematic point with the proposition. So lastly, on what I'd like to see next time as well. So if you could come back next time on the A14 issue and the commercial development issue. The last one was around the infrastructure delivery plan. This is very challenging. If you want a zero carbon development, it's going to need a lot of advanced infrastructure, and Landsec are responsible for the advanced infrastructure. And I don't think there are too many precedents for this. The advanced infrastructure designed for a zero carbon development of this scale, and maybe precedents, I'd love to know about those if you've got them. But I think if you're doing that within the context of that zero carbon ambition and the donut economics, I think that's going to make for a fascinating presentation and discussion next time. I very much look forward to that, because after all, this is going to be a 21st century exemplar. So thank you very much.
Smith. Thank you. Did you want to come back on those
Yeah,
things?
just a couple of points, really.
I got
but
5 or 6 there, but
both related, and first and foremost, I think I'm looking forward to coming back to give a detailed presentation on factors like density and heights and massing and how it all fits together. Got a very clear message about the A14, and we're doing more work on that, and we will bring that back to you about that edge. On scale, and Johnny's going to come back in, it's a big site, and the mobility hubs are around the site, but we need to have one in the northeastern corner, otherwise people are going to have to be faced with perhaps a 15-minute walk between the mobility hub and their car, if they've got one, or picking up parcel or whatever they need to visit the mobility hub for. So just beware of scale, really. And on that note, Johnny, Angela, sorry.
yes, could you make it brief?
I will make it brief, yes. Just to answer your question about the play line in terms of scale, we're looking at the whole play line sits at around about 6 hectares. One little portion of the play line matches almost exactly Market Square here in Cambridge, just out the front. So there's one little square that's just off the main street, and it's the same size, just in terms of scale, as Market Square, yes.
I noticed in your plan there was one rather open green area, which was right at the northeast end of the play line. And I rather regretted that had moved from the area near Cowley Road right up on the left-hand side of the site, which is actually the core of where the sort of town centre part of it was going to be, as I understood it. But it seemed a shame that maybe that was such a long way away. But anyway, we'll see. So I would just like to say, sorry, did you want to come back on any other aspect before I round up?
No, thank you.
Okay. So yes, we'd very much, this is an early time. We haven't had much time, and I would very much like you to come back with a further iteration with some master planning for us to look at. And bearing in mind those questions, and particularly, could you address also the questions that Councillor Thornborough raised about access to the eastern side of the railway, which might impact on your land, and whether you've considered that with County Council, whether there's sufficient green space and play space, the 4 times increase in commercial space, and if rental, then could you move away from leasehold to common hold? And the consultation process looked very good, so let's hope everybody's in mind with that. So, Toby, did you want to sum up at all? Sorry, just to pause there. Councillor Bagent has asked the question, which company has been used for consultation? Sorry, Councillor Bagent has asked on screen, which company has been used for the public consultations?
But first and foremost, it's us. We haven't hired it out to independent consultants. It's part of our DNA actually.
Okay, and
As
one-
town and as Landsec, you and I. And we're working with ECF as a sort of to add further muscle to on the consultation side.
And the other thing which I meant to ask right at the outset was, to what degree have you been informed by the principles of the area action plan?
Very much so. It has been a constant theme for us. We have got a very well-honed piece of work, which is a policy matrix, which looks at policies in the area action plan and how we comply with each and every one of them. We've had a long period of dialogue with the shared planning services. So when we submit the application, it will very clearly set out where there are divergences, and we talked about the amount of commercial space and our rationale for those changes.
Right. Thank you. I'm going to bring that to a close. I can't see any other questions from members. One other thing is, I'd just like you to be aware that, of course, there are increases in commercial space outside your red plan. So the whole area is already being increased in terms of its commercial space. And I think you need to, I don't know whether it's possible to take that into account when you're considering the balance for the whole area. But we welcome you back to another such discussion with us. That would be very helpful. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Chair.
So members, we'll pause here and have maybe a 5 or 10 minute break or 5 minutes, and then we'll come back and we have another briefing. Councillor Smart.
Yeah, apologies, Chair. I've got another meeting at 11:30, so I can't attend the next briefing. It'll be recorded, I presume, will it?
Yes, it will be recorded. Thank you.
Sorry, I thought we only had
We have
one
another
today.
very brief briefing.